So here are the facts as they were presented. On the night of January 3, 2026, United States Special Forces conducted a military operation in Caracas, which is the capital city of Venezuela.
The official target of this operation was the seat of the Venezuelan government, and the accounts that came out described it as a very swift action, really focused on the center of the country's political power.
And during this operation, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and the First Lady, Celia Flores, were taken into custody. The removal was, by all accounts, the central objective of the entire mission.
Now, this information didn't leak out through back channels or rumors. It was all confirmed very publicly by United States President Donald Trump. And he delivered that confirmation during a formal press conference from his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. And that concludes the initial summary of the confirmed events.
That press conference, though, was about so much more than just confirming a military raid. It was really presented as a deliberate and very public turning point, a fundamental shift in United States foreign policy. It was meant to signal a completely new posture for the country in its own hemisphere.
And to really understand the weight of this moment, we have to look back just a little bit. The U.S. has a very long and often very controversial history of involvement in Latin America. For a long time, that history was guided by a policy from way back in the 1800s called the Monroe Doctrine. And what that basically did was declare the Americas as the United States' sphere of influence, off limits to other world powers. And all of a sudden, on this day in 2026, that historical document was being pulled right back to the center of global attention.
The seriousness of this announcement was really underscored by who was standing there alongside the president. This wasn't a message delivered by a press secretary. You had the secretaries of War and State, the director of the CIA, and a senior White House advisor. The visual was unmistakable. This was a unified, top-level decision, a formal declaration from the entire national security apparatus of the U.S. government.
So this action, it was framed not as an ending, but as a beginning. It was positioned as the first step in a new, much more assertive strategic posture. This wasn't just about Venezuela. It was about drawing a brand new line in the sand for the entire Western Hemisphere and signaling a far more forceful approach to come.
Now, to really grasp the scale of this change, it helps to just reconstruct the world as we all understood it just before this happened. The relationship between the United States and Venezuela was already one of high tension. I mean, that's no secret. But that tension was always managed through very different and very established methods.
For years, the accepted reality was that the U.S. was openly opposed to the Maduro government. The playbook, which was understood by pretty much everyone, involved things like economic sanctions and sustained diplomatic pressure. It was a long game of containment. Direct, overt military action to remove a sitting head of state, well, that just wasn't considered the expected next move.
And the Monroe Doctrine we just mentioned, to most of the world, it was exactly that, a piece of history. It was something you studied in a textbook, a relic from a totally different era. The idea that it would just be pulled off the shelf and used as the main justification for a military intervention in the 21st century was for almost everyone a complete shock.
So this information, it came out all at once?
Yes, exactly. It was announced directly by the president in that single press conference, and with his entire national security team standing right there, it was delivered as a clear, unified message. There was really no room left for ambiguity.
Was there any detail given on the operation itself, on how it happened?
The language they used was anything but subtle. The president called the attack unprecedented since World War II. He described it as a spectacular display of American military capability, and he framed it as one of the most effective in the nation's history. The intended message was one of absolute, overwhelming dominance.
The official account really painted this picture of a perfectly executed operation. One key detail they emphasized over and over was that as the mission began, the lights across the entire city of Caracas went out, a citywide blackout that they attributed to U.S. expertise.
But surely there was some kind of resistance. Well, according to the U.S. account, any resistance was overcome with incredible speed. It was claimed that their forces moved so quickly that President Maduro didn't even have time to reach a fortified steel safe room. But the capture was just the first part of the announcement. The next part was even more staggering. The U.S. declared it would now run the country of Venezuela.
For how long? The official answer was indefinite. No timeline was given at all. The statement was that the U.S. would govern the country until a safe and proper and wise transfer of power could be arranged. And this political plan, it came with a huge economic component. The announcement that major U.S. oil companies would be brought in to take over and rebuild Venezuela's vast energy infrastructure.
So what was the official justification for such a drastic action?
The administration laid out two primary reasons. First, the accusation that Venezuela was harboring foreign adversaries right on America's doorstep. And second, that it possessed dangerous offensive weapons that posed a direct threat.
And this is where that historical framing became really personal. President Trump explicitly invoked the 19th century Monroe Doctrine, but then he put his own name on it, rebranding it the Donroe Doctrine. This was meant to signify a new, more muscular and personal reassertion of U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere after what he called decades of neglect.
But here is where the story takes a strange and unresolved turn. While all of these dramatic declarations were being made in Florida, reports from the ground in Caracas were painting a very different picture. There were no visible signs of a U.S. takeover. Key locations, like the Miraflores Presidential Palace and major military bases, were apparently still being guarded by Venezuelan soldiers.
So, on one hand, we have the official reality that was presented to the world. A nation's leader has been captured, and a foreign power has declared its intention to govern the country and control its most valuable resource.
And then on the other hand, we have the observable reality on the ground, which seems to completely contradict that official narrative. And this creates a profound and dangerous gap between a declaration of control and the actual exercise of it. And it is in that gap, between the words spoken at a podium and the actions of soldiers on the street, that the future of Venezuela, and perhaps the entire region, will be decided.